Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is a weekly update and I have 5 books to talk about today that I've finished since last time. And this is generally a pretty strong batch of books, so that's exciting. So before we get started, leave some sort of musical instrument emoji in the comments to let me know that you're here in honor of Sistersong. So we'll begin with 4-star books because that's my lowest rating, which, you know, is fantastic. It was definitely a good week of reading. So the first book I'll talk about that I rated 4 stars is The Death of Jane Lawrence by Starling. So I did receive this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out October 5th, so real soon here. So this is adult horror, and it follows Jane, who's a very practical woman, and she's decided that a marriage of convenience is the best way to remain independent. So she chooses Augustine, who's a doctor, who agrees to this marriage proposal on one condition, that she never visit his family estate. However, on their wedding night, she ends up stranded there and discovers basically that things are not what they seem at this house. So I thought this was really enjoyable and it had a fantastic gothic tone to it. It takes place in this post-war alternate Britain, and so we do have this sort of historical feel as well. It's pretty fast-paced overall, and I definitely wanted to keep reading. I had actually started it kind of late afternoon, early evening, and I was like, I just absolutely need to finish this book before I go to bed because I just couldn't stand the thought of having to wait until the next day to finish it. So I was like, I don't care how late I stay up, I just have to finish it. However, I do think it does have some lulls in the middle and end, but it did ultimately come together in a really interesting way. I think the writing was pretty engaging overall, and I liked how you slowly start to see that things are not quite right and that there are mysterious things happening here. There are definitely some spooky moments, particularly with the house. And, you definitely get the feeling pretty early on that something is off about this house. It is not quite right. And I really liked getting to know more about it and how, again, everything came together. So some things are still admittedly a little bit confusing, and I'm not sure I entirely followed what happened, but it's still a cool idea. I immediately liked Jane. She's, a bit socially awkward, and she's kind of had to teach herself how to make eye contact and, do small talk, things like that. She's really into math, and so she's a self-taught accountant, so I love that. She's pretty practical and logical, and I found her to be super relatable, particularly with this love of math. I also love math. So she finds math to be really soothing, and she actually reads books with mathematical proofs in it. So this kind of reminded me of my own experience in grad school. Admittedly, I don't love mathematical proofs. They're kind of weird, but, getting to read a protagonist who is actually reading math proofs is feel you, So that was exciting. So I really liked how she proposes this idea and then kind of discovers that maybe she is actually deserving of love. So I think she does have some hard times in this book where she kind of realizes that things are not really what she thought that they would be, but I liked how stubborn and determined she is. Augustine, this doctor, is a bit more of a question. It seems like he genuinely wants to help his patients, but he has some secrets as well and is a bit tormented by some of his failures. I liked seeing how Jane and Augustine interact over the book and how this kind of dynamic changes and develops as things happen. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed this book. I would certainly recommend it, especially, coming up on spooky season, definitely check it out. But I'm interested. I somehow didn't realize that this is the same author as The Luminous Dead, which I own and want to read. So hopefully, now that I know that this was a really good book, I definitely want to check out more of the author's other books. So again, definitely recommend this one. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is White Trash Warlock by David R. Slayton. So this is adult urban fantasy, and I did receive this for review from the author. And we'll take a quick break before I get to the actual review, because when I first hauled it, I actually forgot to talk about some of the things that he sent me as well. So we've got a fun little sticker, and then we've got these little cards, which are really cool, especially after reading the book. So now okay, yeah, I think I know who that person is. So I'll just kind of flip through those quickly here, but these were really neat, and I'll probably be putting them somewhere on the shelf behind me, so just wanted to briefly show that here. But anyway, let's get back into the review. So, like I think I said, this is a 4-star book, and it's adult urban fantasy where we follow Adam, who hasn't spoken to his brother in years since Bobby committed him to a psych ward until Bobby asks him for help because turns out a murderous spirit has possessed his wife. So Adam arrives in Denver only to discover that all of the local magicians are dead and he's the spirit's next target. So generally this was really fun overall, and I definitely want to read the next one, which comes out in October, so that's very exciting. So I think it was pretty good with the pacing overall and its gripping, though I did start to wonder towards the end just how everything would wrap up in time. I do feel like the ending was maybe a little bit rushed, but at the same time, I feel pretty satisfied with it. There were like 20 pages left, and I was like, oh my goodness, what else is going to happen here? But I am very intrigued by the world. It's obviously urban fantasy, so it's set in our world, but we've got assorted creatures like elves, gnomes, lizard people, and even more. So some races control these watchtowers that are supposed to essentially monitor the supernatural world. We don't get to spend a ton of time with all of these different races, but I really like what we get here, and I definitely want to know more about them. There are some similarities with the Tarot Secrets by K.B. Edwards, and that was actually how I got in contact with the author, because I was kind of gushing about, how much I love that series. They have similarities, but they do feel different. So, we do have tarot playing a pretty large role in both books, and just generally I think the feel is pretty similar. So in terms of the tarot aspects, this kind of comes up when Adam goes spirit walking, because he essentially assumes a different position based on a card and what his ultimate goal is while spirit walking. So I think this was a really cool idea. We also have people in various roles that are based on the cards as well. Magic, I think, is a little bit nebulous here. I am not entirely sure about the rules yet, but hopefully that's something that, we'll learn over the course of the series. Adam is certainly on the weaker side of things, but I feel like he may grow more because of his involvement with some larger powers. I think a lot of the story is focused on Adam sort of being around his mom and his brother again, and we obviously have a lot of strained relationships here because they did commit him to this asylum when he was younger, because essentially he couldn't control his abilities and they didn't believe him. So Adam is certainly still dealing with this, but I think he is learning more about the circumstances behind this and learning more about his mom and brother in general. So I feel like we could see some changing family bonds, and I'm really excited for that. He's clearly, I think, a good guy at heart and wants to prevent evil from, taking over. And even if he doesn't necessarily want to do some of the tasks, he steps up to get it done. He's also gay and does come from a background where this is a little bit frowned upon, so I think he is still kind of dealing with this, but he does have some really lovely moments where he's able to open up to some characters, and yeah, I'm definitely here for what seems to be this sort of slow burn romance. So Bobby, his brother, seems like a bit of a jerk until we get to know him more. I feel like I understand him a lot better and hope that he and Adam can reconcile. So we do spend some time with some elves, and they seem rather mysterious. I'm certainly curious about their powers and the hierarchy in their society. And then, of course, our ancient horror that we're fighting against. I really liked this adversary and its abilities. And then one of the other characters I really liked is Vic, and he seems like a genuinely nice guy, and I'm really hoping we get to see him more in the next book. So yeah, there's definitely some implications and things that happen here, and I definitely want to explore the aftermath of this. I wanted to make sure I read this, obviously, before the second one came out soon, so really had a good time with this. If you're into urban fantasy, I would certainly recommend this, especially if you do like the tarot sequence. I think, like I said, there are some similarities. So I think the last 4-star book I'll talk about is In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. So this is an adult thriller where Nora is invited to Claire's bachelorette party, or in the UK, I think it's called a Hindu, even though they haven't seen each other in 10 years. So once everyone arrives, things start to go wrong and secrets can't stay hidden forever. So this was really enjoyable, especially for Ruth Ware's debut novel. I've heard a lot of mixed things about this, and I was kind of uncertain about it, so I had actually borrowed it from the library as an ebook and then happened to find this in the library sale that I went to this weekend, so I liked it enough to pick up the physical copy. This is probably my third favorite of her books, behind Turn the Key and One by One. I think it's very fast-paced, intense, and she just does such an excellent job with the atmosphere. We have this house in the woods, and it feels very cold and isolated, and it just really adds to the story, I think. I definitely put together part of what had happened, but I still found myself guessing as to whether or not that was actually right. I feel very satisfied with the explanation and ending overall. So we do have two timelines here. We have the present when Nora's in the hospital, and we've also got flashbacks to what happened days before. So I thought this was well done, and the switches between these two timelines were timed pretty nicely. We do also have, I can't remember if it's really flashbacks to like when Claire and Nora were growing up, or if Nora's just like thinking about it. But anyway, we do kind of have some establishment of, you know, what happened when they used to be friends. So I really rooted for Nora. I think she's a bit of an unreliable narrator, but it's a little bit different than what you usually see because it's not really her fault, and she's actually trying pretty hard to remember what happened. She's really likable, though. She's kind of shy and, you know, doesn't really want to be here because it's a bit of an awkward situation, but she does agree to this because she's, you know, kind of pressured into it. She's stuck in the past a bit, but I think I can understand why that is. I really liked what happens with her over the course of the book. In terms of some of the other characters, we also have Nina, who seems a bit brash at times and can be really sarcastic, but she seems to be pretty nice overall. And she's probably my second favorite character and seems like really the only person who's actually a good friend there. Claire seems perfect, but it's interesting to see if, you know, she's changed from when they were younger. Flo seems really desperate to be a good friend, and generally I'll say that I didn't really like most of the people there and thought that they were rude, especially with how they treat Nora, but it's still really fun to read all about them and, like, you know, figure out who did what and just create all sorts of fun theories. So I would definitely recommend this. Her books seem to just work really well for me, and like I said, I think this is probably my third favorite of her books, so I would rank them one by one: Turn of the Key, In a Dark, Dark Wood, probably The Woman in Cabin 10, and then The Death of Mrs. Westaway. I haven't read The Lion Game yet, but I do have that. But yeah, so if you're curious about, you know, my hierarchy, but definitely had a good time with this. If you're looking for a nice atmospheric thriller, I would suggest picking this up. Next, I have a 4.5-star book, and that's As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. So this is a YA thriller, and it's the last book in this A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. So here, Pip has gained a lot of attention after solving some murder cases and hosting her true crime podcast. But she's still blindsided when it seems like someone is watching her, and someone keeps asking, who will look for you when you're the one who disappears? So Pip has to find this person or be as good as dead. So this was really good, but it was probably not my favorite of the series just because of some of the things that happen here. I will say it is much darker than previous installments, but I think it kind of makes sense given the trajectory that Pip has kind of been, you know, going down over the course of the books. It does get pretty brutal at times, and I had several moments where I kept just shouting like, no, I don't want this to happen. So, you know, it's like, it was a weird reading experience because I liked what I was reading, but at the same time I was like, I don't want this to happen to our characters. It's mostly fast-paced, but I think it's a little bit less so than the others. I think it did take a little bit longer to get going or really get to a point where the main plot starts to pick up. It also, I think, has a little bit less mixed media elements in here, and I think that was one of the things that really helped the other two books read a lot quicker, but I mean, like, we still get some here as well. I think the trilogy seems to come full circle in a really nice way, and I kind of want to reread the first two books and pick up on clues that I may have missed earlier. I did really like some of the elements that come in. You know, I'm trying to be a little bit vague in this because it is the last book in a trilogy and it's a thriller series, but like I really don't want to spoil anything. So I'll just say I really wasn't expecting some elements to come in here, and like, damn, it just like emotionally wrecked me in places. Pip is in a much darker place overall because of all of the experiences that she's had and some of the traumatic events that she's lived through. She's not really doing well, even though she pretends like things are okay. And I can understand some of the choices that she makes. She very clearly needs help, but she's kind of been let down by some people in the past and is hesitant to trust. I am still a little bit conflicted on some of the things that happen here with our characters, and I'm not sure if some of this is a stretch or not, but this is something I keep going back and forth about. Like, I didn't necessarily want these things to happen, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting that they did, and I'm like, that got real dark, and I'm kind of here for it. So basically, I have a lot of mixed feelings, but I still really enjoyed this book. So, like, you know, I don't know, do with that what you will. But I think Pip is still a really enjoyable main character, and I definitely rooted for her. She's a really strong character, and I think some of the stuff that she has to deal with is super heartbreaking. I continue to love Robbie. He's so supportive, and he'll do anything to help Pip. He's really her rock, and I just absolutely love them together. Pip's parents are somewhat oblivious to things, but are generally well-meaning. The police kind of continue to be incompetent, but we've got Pip's friends as well, and they're all really supportive and willing to help her. So some things that happen here are just like really, really sad, especially because some characters will never know what truly happened. So I don't know. Hopefully that was still vague enough to be interesting and a good review. But I absolutely loved this trilogy as a whole and would highly recommend it, especially, if you're looking for a super fast-paced, engaging thriller series and, like mixed media elements and this true crime podcast and solving murders, like definitely check these books out. So finally, the last book I'll talk about today is a 5-star book, and that's Sistersong by Lucy Holland. So I received this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out October 5th. So this is an adult historical fantasy following the 3 children of this king in Britain who has, or at least had, a magical bond to the land. So Riva is a healer, but can't heal herself. Cain wants to be accepted for who he is, as a son, not a daughter, and Cinna dreams of adventure. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these characters' names right. I'm doing my best here. But all of these siblings are entangled in a web of treachery and heartbreak, and they must forge their own paths. So this was just absolutely beautiful, and also haunting and sad. I just loved everything about it. I think it really reminds me a lot of Juliet Marillier or Stickney Pike or Madeline Miller, like those sort of historical fantasy books that I really love. This had the same sort of quality to it. So I think the writing is just wonderful and lovely. The pacing is great. I do think it's probably more character driven, but there's really a lot of time to explore these relationships, and also, we do get some faster paced moments like battles and things like that. So I was definitely invested in this book the whole time, and I could not stop reading. The setting is very atmospheric, so it takes place in Britain a long time ago, and we do see some familiar faces from legend. I really like how this was incorporated, but we also get to have little folktales within the story that provide excellent immersion within this time period and just generally like fitting in with the mythology, which was fabulous. I did actually recognize some of these stories, or at least like the general bones of them, with things like, I think, the Wild Hunt and things like that. So that was really cool to see. We do get some elements of magic here as well, and I really like how it's tied to the land and nature. I didn't anticipate the direction this book went, and it just made me feel so emotional. It generally, I think, has a more melancholy tone, especially because it's set at a time when Christianity is kind of taking over and the old ways are vanishing. And this is something that always makes me sad to read about, so, I mean, that your mileage may vary on that, but oh my goodness, the feels in this book. So the point of view sections rotate between the 3 children. Like I said, we have Riva, who is the oldest, and she was badly injured in a fire as a child. So I feel really mixed on her because I actually liked her initially and sympathized with her, but then I started to dislike her as she makes some choices that have consequences. I do genuinely feel bad for her because she's had to live with everyone's pity and thinks that her life will just be like that of a noblewoman where, she's married off for political purposes, that is, if someone accepts her. I can understand her desire for love, and I think she's really just caught in a bad place in general. Cain just wants to be seen as a son and brother rather than a daughter and sister, and Cain was by far my favorite character in this book. He's got a really heartbreaking journey of, wanting to be the person that he was born to be. I think this actually provided an excellent glimpse of what it's like to be transgender and some of the hardships that can accompany this, with people like refusing to acknowledge how he wants to be addressed and things like that. There's some really beautiful moments in his journey overall, and just, I loved everything about Cain. So then, of course, we have Cinna, who is the youngest, and she's got a little bit of an ability as a seer and can use glamour. So I started off disliking her. I think she is still my least favorite of all the siblings, but I will say I did really start to feel for her at the end. She's spoiled and more selfish and bratty, but that doesn't mean that she's not deserving of happiness as well. She just wants love and sort of like a fairy tale-like story with adventure. She does have some abilities that she doesn't fully know how to control, and so that leads to some problems. But obviously the bonds between all these siblings plays a huge role in this book, and we get to see the full range of this from, jealousy and petty squabbles to full support and understanding. So there were some really lovely moments overall, and also some just like horribly heartbreaking ones. So generally this was really lovely and sad. I would highly recommend this, especially if you're a fan of like any of the authors that I mentioned, like Juliet Marillier, you know, Sidney Pike, or Madeline Miller. I think it has a lot of similar qualities to it. I just absolutely love this book. I really want to get a physical copy of it because I just loved it so much and feel like this is one that I would reread. I will definitely be keeping an eye on Lucy Holland because, you know, clearly I loved this and I definitely want more. I feel like this is really fitting to read around this time of the year because I guess for whatever reason I typically associate like fall and winter with more historical fantasy. I had such a fabulous time with this. Again, highly recommend it. So with that, those are all the books that I have to talk to you about today. I am currently reading For Your Own Good by Samantha Downing, and I'm doing that as a buddy read with Amber from Books of Amber. It's in the other room. I should have grabbed it, but I didn't. So let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question today, do you tend to read a lot of historical fantasy? I am a little bit more hit or miss with that. I think I really, really love Juliet Marillier's books, so like she's certainly an author that works really well for me with this sort of historical feel to it. But yeah, I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link's in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.